Welcome to the Spotlight On series, where we get to sit down and speak to some of the most inspirational market leaders from some of the UK's most exciting brands. We'll learn about their careers, their challenges, and their achievements, all to inspire you to help you grow your careers. Hello, welcome to this episode of Spotlight On, where we're joined by the infamous Stephen Kenwright, who many of you may know as the founder of Rise at 7, but for the purpose of this episode, we're hoping to dig in a little bit more into the sort of career path that you've had leading up to that point. So I guess to kick things off, Stephen, can you tell us a little bit about your career to date?
Okay, so I have been in industry, like proper jobs outside of university when I graduated since 2012, 2011. So like 12, 13 years, something like that. It's all kind of merging into one a little bit. Started out at an in-house agency, basically. So before that was cool, but it wasn't particularly great either. It was B2B, very large, and really it was kind of just an opportunity for me to find out something I actually enjoyed doing. Then I went to an agency called Branded 3 in Leeds and spent 7 years there, pretty much. Okay. I started out building links on 14 grand a year and ended up part of the management team, particularly through the transition into being owned and then merged into Kin & Carter. Then me and my wife decided we would start a family, so I wanted to be in one place. So I went in-house for a little while as well and took a job that was in one location and a little bit less travelling and so on. So I was heading up digital at Stratstone and Evans, Halshaw and Car Store and the rest of the Pendragon PLC brands for a little while. And that really wasn't for me. So then
the journey
it seemed like a good idea to start something myself at that point, yeah.
Drawing right the way back to, I guess, the early parts of the career, which, you know, in its own right was super successful, you know, within 7 years, obviously started out in what sounds like a specialist role and then obviously ended up in a management role in a rather large agency.
Yeah.
What would you say were your kind of like key development points that you focused on from when you were in that specialist role that helped you kind of climb that ladder within an agency?
I would say that when I was going into the agency, I already knew where I wanted to get to. That was a very short-term goal, by the way. Like, I wanted to be an account manager on page SEO, right? So I kind of going into that, at the time, the world was a little bit different, going into that entry-level role, doing the grunt work, basically, and then I wanted to be leading strategy on some accounts. That's where I wanted to get to. So my early decisions were geared towards getting to there as quickly as I can. Then after I progressed really quickly, which was one of the good things about agencies generally, but like certainly Branded 3 at the time, because it had literally just been acquired about a year after I joined. I progressed very quickly because the management team at the time needed to plan for who was going to be the next management team and started to bring on some of the younger talent very quickly. So I joined the management team after about 3 years. Okay. And I think it's really just like be ready for those kind of opportunities when they present themselves. And it's really interesting how different businesses can be, because it was quite obvious at Branded 3 what you would do if you wanted to progress, because that's what the management team do, right? And that's what the senior leaders and the owners do. They speak at events, they make sure that they are really showing off their expertise in blog posts or whatever it was at the time. It was much more that kind of thing. So if you wanted to progress, you did that too, and it worked. And I think that's true of any business. Like, it's the behaviors that are exhibited by the senior team that's kind of what you want to emulate, because that's really what they value in the business.
And I guess it sounds like there's a nice combination between an opportunity to progress, so i.e. the business itself scaling, having just gone for an acquisition, but then also the kind of action that you took personally to make sure, like, well, as it was scaling, to make sure that you were the person that they would consider straight away to kind of fit those roles.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, I wasn't alone. There were other people in the business that were doing the same kind of thing. And the truth is, it's not like a zero-sum thing in any business, really. It's not like you progress at anyone else's expense as long as it's a good business. There's lots of opportunities for everyone, and you're kind of helping other people to achieve their goals at the same time. It actually really does help you too. So like people like Laura Crimmins at the time, who was my counterpart in the kind of creative side of the business, me and her progressed at a very similar time, doing very similar things. And it was literally just spotting those opportunities and taking them.
At what point did you really notice your role changing or morphing into something way beyond what you expected? So obviously, you know, going from being a specialist and then in 3 years being on the management team, there must have been a big like, oh shit, this is what you do at a management level, and then sort of seeing beyond that where the role would go.
It's much more gradual than I expected, definitely, because I felt like I was being earmarked for that kind of role pretty early on. So although I was an SEO account manager or strategist, as we used to call it in the agency, there were lots of other ones, and I started to notice that I would be parachuted into to save accounts that were not going particularly well, or to cover important meetings or pitches more often. So I started to get more sort of face time and more time front and center, and more of that. And as that happened, I kind of had fewer and fewer responsibilities with my individual accounts because there's just not enough time in the day to do everything. So that kind of gradual, I kind of knew it was coming in that regard. And you obviously you do your first management meeting and you're kind of expecting that this is behind the big door and you're in the boardroom and it's like, I don't know, Lord Sugar's there or something. It's just not at all. Like the majority of, every single management meeting I've been in, any business, any agency is just a shambles, right? Yeah. So you're just like talking to people who are pretty much on your level, whether they seem that way on the outside or not. They've got their knowledge, you've got your knowledge. You kind of figure out quite quickly that, okay, I've got a part to play here. I'm not expected to know every single thing. It doesn't matter that I don't know the difference between gross and net right now. I can figure that kind of thing out as I go along. And actually the benefit for you is just being there and listening to people who do know what they're talking about those things, do their thing, and you kind of pick it up by osmosis, really. So it's so much more gradual than I expected.
I'm guessing there's an element of confidence in there as well, as I say, that like point where you realise, you get over the imposter syndrome side of things. You realise actually everyone in the room is human. Everyone does have their strengths and their weaknesses, regardless of how long they've been doing something. That confidence, I think, can naturally start to come through. From your perspective, there must have been a point where, even when it became sort of Kin & Carter, it became this massive organisation. Was there a point you realised this isn't for me anymore, and kind of what were the incentives to go and find something new?
I actually really enjoyed Kin & Carter itself, and it was very messy, the actual process of integrating one business in with the other 9 agencies. And Jay, who was a CEO at the time, had like an enormous task along with the proper management team of Kin & Carter to do that. It was really interesting to see glimpses of that, and he would involve a lot of people like myself in certain areas, like around how we're going to position the businesses, and how do we build a singular sales methodology across all of the 1,500 people, and like that. So it was absolutely not I don't like this kind of thing. I was moving on specifically because I wanted to go in-house and be in one place, because this is pre-pandemic, 4 days a week on the road, 3 nights a week in hotels. And there's a time in your career that's great. You're flying around, you're going to different countries and you're seeing some stuff, and that's really cool. But then there's a time when actually I really should be at home, and me and my wife wanted to start a family, so it was just not going to continue that way. And the opportunities in a global network are quite limited. If you're like, I'm not leaving my house, mate, I'm going to stay around Leeds, and that is it. Because all of the people that you need to talk to are in London or Manchester or Chicago, so you've got to be prepared to do that kind of thing in a global enterprise. And at that point in my career, it wasn't.
So being an agency man through and through at this point, you took the plunge that many people do and went brand side.
Yeah.
Would you say, I've got two questions around this, would you say the main incentive was the lifestyle, the family and fitting in around that, or was there a part of you that was like, I want to go and do brands, I don't want to like do something different?
So the second question, definitely wanted to experience what it's really like. And I think if you spend all of your career in agency, you never get the level of empathy that you really need to be able to understand like why things are the way they are. You're there as a client-facing person. Anyone in an agency, you can be guilty of thinking they just don't get it. And there's really good institutional reasons why they can't do the thing that you're wanting them to do, or why they're doing that slowly, or why they've asked you for this thing that you think is just weird. So there's lots of good reasons. Until you experience it yourself, I think you don't know what they are. And even though I was at Pendragon for quite a short time, I'm like, oh, this all makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
But primarily, yeah, it was because I wanted the kind of different lifestyle. It is a different lifestyle. You know, it's people say slower. It is slower in the sense of fewer things are going out the door quickly, but it's not slower in the sense of you have like a lot of different responsibilities. Like in an agency, you might be doing the same thing over and over again for 10 brands in a month, and you've got to get this stuff out, and it feels really fast. Whereas in-house, you might be doing 10 completely different things for one brand, and your context switching in a completely different way. So it's not slow in that sense, but the lifespan of a project, like when an agency comes in, that project's existed for 4 months already, and it exists for another 10 years or whatever after the agency's left the door. So it's a lot more long term, I think.
And I guess then you've been on the sort of back on the agency side following that, which we'll touch on. But I guess even speaking from impressions perspective, like, and thinking about again career development, when we've seen someone who's worked both agency and brand side, it is a huge tick box. And obviously, if someone has worked agency side entirely, you can kind of say that empathy might be struggling, that sometimes like the commercial side of things might not be as there. But then obviously someone who's worked brand side their entire career, you're a bit like, yeah, okay, is this going to be a big old learning curve to come in here? And I guess, was that something similar that you experienced at Rise?
It was, yeah. I would say there's a real advantage to having experienced agency at some point and knowing what you're getting yourself in for, right? Because it is a different lifestyle generally to how it is in-house. And if you had been just completely brand side for the entirety of your career, it's a bit of a shock to the system when you first step into an agency. But I think, like, particularly some of the roles that we headhunted for and the people that we brought in at really senior levels, like Jerry White to head up SEO, at the time had been global head of SEO for Just Eat, and Elle came in as our head of creative or head of brand, and she was heading up brand at Misguided. I mean, there's a real opportunity for leveraging the experience they've got at similar brands. They've worked with Misguided, so we get to utilize that experience on brands like Misguided. So, there is a real advantage to actually having an insight into how those things really work. So it's totally a plus, yeah.
At what point did you realize you either wanted to go at it alone, obviously with a co-founder, or were kind of spotted an opportunity at least to go at it alone?
It was the default setting for me. Okay. I think it was completely accidental, and Rise at 7 was thrown together in a month, right? The proposition was pretty good, if I say so myself, but it was still like, we think we've got an opportunity here to do something like this. And for me, it was like, it wasn't going to work out at Pendragon. There were a lot of redundancies to be made, and although my job at the time was try and work out who should be going, I'm like, well, this is not what I signed up for, and I don't want to kind of stick around and take 3 people's jobs, if that makes sense. When you come in at that kind of senior level, that's almost how it is. So I decided, okay, well, that's probably not long term for me. What are my options? I'd waited a really long time to find an in-house role that suited. Like I said, I wanted to be in one place at a time. One of the disadvantages of being in the north is there are not a lot of very big brands quite close to your house. Doesn't matter where you live, unless you're in a city centre, you've not got an awful lot of opportunities to work at somewhere really, really substantial. There's a few, right, but not like loads. And I'd waited a really long time for that job, and I'd kind of applied for a couple of things, but not that interested. I'm like, this could be another 6 months, it could be another year, kind of through that application process. So I'm like, well, I don't think that's going to work. My wife was 4 months pregnant, so as much as it seems like a stupid idea to start an agency when you're expecting, and we'd literally just moved house as well, right? It was like, well, okay, the default is can I sell? Can I go and get work? I can go and get work. Okay, well, that's all that we really need to do. And I had a co-founder who is a powerhouse creatively. I'm like, okay, we can do the creative and I can sell the creative. What could go wrong?
Yeah.
It was like just like a really straightforward choice of, yeah, but it was by no means like I've got the entrepreneurial itch that I need to scratch. Like I'd never planned on starting a business, and whether I do it again or not is up for debate. Yeah. It's a different lifestyle again.
I guess that's quite interesting to kind of unpack in itself, because obviously a lot of people, you know, like the idea of starting a business, and I guess the objective behind that can vary from person to person. You know, a lot of people like the idea of it being theirs, and they've started something, and that sort of thing. Obviously, there's potential, you know, financial gains to make from doing some stuff like that. But it's bloody hard work, as I'm sure you can vouch for. It sounds like from your perspective, you were able to potentially drop some of those risks by having a co-founder who, you know, you could deliver on the actual delivery side of stuff, but also pick up the responsibility of the sales and marketing stuff. So from those people who are potentially watching and kind of summing up whether they should or shouldn't go at it alone, whether that's freelance or starting something themselves, like what advice can you give to try and make it as successful as possible for themselves?
I think one thing that you're absolutely right on is like know why you're doing it, because I think people go into things with expectations that are sometimes unrealistic, right? If you start an agency because you want to earn the big bucks, probably not. Like so few agency owners actually earn the big bucks. Yep. If you want to earn loads of money, then maybe freelance could be for you actually, because there's loads of opportunities to you know, there's a shortage of talent generally, and freelancers are in demand. So, you know, if the money is the thing, then maybe freelance is the right thing for you. But ultimately, both of those situations, when you're starting a business, you either need to know how to sell, or you need to found a business with someone who knows how to sell. That's the biggest thing, or be just really willing to throw yourself into it and give it a go. And the people who are kind of, you know, maybe they're the creative or the technical expert and they hate sales and they never really wanted to do that, and they start freelancing for themselves or they start their own business, they tend to be the ones that suffer a little bit more with the work-life balance, with the, you know, the difficulty getting it off the ground and the difficulty growing quickly if that's what they want to do. So I would say the biggest bit of advice I could give is like, sales is not a dirty word. It's a fact of life, especially if you work for yourself. To a degree, if you work agency side as well. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, like very useful stuff. I'm sure there's lots of people wondering whether to do it or not, but I guess the realities of what to expect are super important. Taking the conversation on a little bit into your time at Rise then. Obviously Rise was hugely successful. It scaled, it grew, you recruited loads of people. There must have been promotions within the company as that sort of scaled. So thinking again to the people watching or listening, what would you have been looking at when, as a kind of either a recruiter or someone assessing whether someone should be promoted or not? What sort of skills, attributes, what made a good recruit from your perspective?
So those two things are somewhat different when it comes to promotions or whether it comes to bringing someone in from outside, because the default position for Rise was always, we'll bring someone in from the outside if we don't have that person in-house. And that would typically be more senior roles. That would often be when we've given opportunities to manage a team, for example, someone who hasn't managed a team before. Sometimes it works really well and sometimes it doesn't. And when it doesn't, we've got to have a get out and a way of actually bringing on someone who's going to help that team, because you can't just leave those people to flounder. So for the most part, we would prefer to promote internally, and there were a lot of promotions, like you said. There is a difference between being an individual contributor and being a manager, and they are a different skill set. And just because you're good at your job doesn't mean you're going to be a good manager. And that can cause loads of problems, and we didn't always get it right. You know, someone who could be a really good PR, give them a team, and it's a disaster. it happens, you know, you don't know for sure exactly how that's going to work until you do give them the opportunity to manage other people. But if you want to get promoted to those senior levels, there is a part of the job that's outside just doing your day-to-day that you've done to date. And that could be people management, because, you know, ultimately the organization's only successful if it keeps getting more and more good people, or making the people it's got better and better. Someone has got to help with that. And if you are the type of person that can contribute to the learning and development of everyone else, there's a real opportunity for you. And then again, sales, like bringing on more business creates more opportunity for everyone else. So those two areas really are a couple of the more obvious ones for outside of your, are you really good at building links? Are you really good at auditing websites? Are you really good at coming up with ideas, etc.? That are always going to be a place for those people. But the more senior roles in the business are occupied by people who can manage people, or people who can manage clients, or people who can bring on new business, really. And I think that's true everywhere.
Yeah, I agree. And I guess thinking again back as an agency owner with, you know, lots of people, lots going on, as I'm sure you were spinning lots of plates, were there things that people could have done or that did do within your agency that really got them noticed within? Obviously, you mentioned new business and sales, and you mentioned kind of like doing some good work, but I'm just again thinking about people who might be working in an agency at the moment, like what can you do to really help get yourself noticed within a company, and without kind of necessarily banging the drum unnecessarily?
If you want to get noticed, you can shout about yourself, right? That kind of does work to a degree. It's never as good as someone else shouting about you. And it's really helpful to understand who in the business has the clout to shout on your behalf and help you to progress. There's always people within the business that's true for, you know, the senior leaders, the people who are in charge of departments or P&Ls or whatever. But more than anything else, this is a services business, it's the clients. And if a client gives really good feedback about someone, all of a sudden, the whole management team, the whole senior hierarchy of the business goes, hang on, that person is a future star if we haven't already earmarked them for something like that. And you're looking them then. And at that point, you're like, well, that's a good thing they've done. That's a good thing. And it's just so much easier to get noticed when you get that first bit of good feedback. So it's like, it's, yes, be noticed by the senior people in the business, but be noticed by the clients. And the more you can get that good feedback, the more it's a self-fulfilling cycle. And that really does help.
Goes back to that building confidence, isn't it? It's be noticed, but be noticed for I guess, the right reasons, not for banging a drum unnecessarily, I guess.
Yeah, for sure.
To round off the conversation then, like if you had to go back and start your career again, what would you focus on if it was all to start?
I went through the first half of my career kicking myself that I never learned to code. And then the second half of my career thinking, thank God I never learned to code. Because you kind of have that thought process while you're doing the job that if you knew this other thing, if you had been trained in this, you've got a degree in programming, if you, whatever it might be, I was very much in the SEO side, so coding is the thing that was kind of part of that. You're like, I would be so much better at my job. Absolutely true. As soon as you get to a certain point in your career, it's like, that's not the job anymore. And actually, the more time you spend coding, the less valuable you are compared to if you can help other people to do those things, or to create the environment that allows your coders to do great work by clearing stuff off their plate, or, you know, again, sales or whatever it might be. It's like all of a sudden the actual practitioner type of work, you want to know how to do that, right? It's really helpful. You can train people better. You can empathize better with them if you know how to do the job because you've done it. And they trust you more when they think that you know kind of what they're talking about as well. But at the same time, you being the best one in the room at that thing is detrimental. You want to be able to let that stuff go. You want to, you know, if I think to like kind of more creative ad agencies, there's a reason that the creative director is usually the one who's a copywriter. It's because they can't design things, so they don't try to clear everything else off the work already done and go, I'm going to do this again myself. It's like, you've got to let that stuff go. So I would say, like, know where you want to get to, and don't kick yourself about all the things that you don't know yet, and focus on learning things that are going to help you in the long term, and not just like the latest thing. I need to know how to use I know Python was big recently, and now I think it's ChatGPT and all these other things. You need those skills. Well,
For a while.
you need them for a while.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Amazing. Well, thanks so much for joining us. Really interesting stuff. I'm sure everyone's got value from what you've had to say as well. So thanks.
Very welcome. Really pleased to be invited. It's awesome.
Thanks for watching. For more content like this, don't forget to sign up to our newsletter, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and follow us on social.